nobody cared. But nobody cared to even ask what effect that would have on women in prison. Nobody has ever, who's been making these policies, has ever betrayed the slightest concern about the effect of women on women of introducing males into what are supposed to be and are still labelled as women's spaces. I'm the parent of a teenage daughter, and I've always considered myself a feminist, even though I realise now I probably didn't really know what that meant in practice, and I certainly didn't know any feminist theory. I've been doing some reading on that more recently, and it's very, very enlightening. I began to notice that I kept hearing this term self-ID, and I knew what it was in relation to. And I kept I would bat away the kind of concerns that it raised in me, but it was the sort of thing that struck me. I thought, well, that's obviously a dreadful idea, obviously an awful idea. Surely no one can possibly think that that's a good idea. A couple of years ago, it was the J.K. Rowling thing that really, really made me understand, made me see what was going on, because I saw what happened. I saw what she tweeted. I read what she wrote. I saw what people were saying about it, and I saw people talking about, this is obviously transphobic, and I think, well no, I haven't seen anything that's like that. That you'll have heard, I think we've all heard that story a number of times, and that really made me understand what's been going on. And it's in my nature to kind of focus on an issue when I feel very strongly about it. So that's been what I've been focusing on for the last several years. And obviously I do have particular concerns because I have this teenage daughter who is growing up in this world. I know what her view is, and I know that she's a bright girl. She knows what she can see, and I think all her friends can know what they can see as well. But it worries me because she's got this line to tread. She's got this path to follow. She's going into a field. She wants to become. She wants to go into a field that's very, very mired in this. Very. We know about people who in this field who've had their fingers burned, who've spoken out and been battered down, and I worry about that. Just as I worry about her as a young woman, finding her way in the world and trying to kind of make her way as a full human being in a world that doesn't see her as that, and increasingly less every day allows her and her sisters to be fully human. I think that a lot of people, if my experience is anything to go by, aren't really thinking things through. So they're not really examining what the words they're hearing actually mean. And I can think back to when I would see, as I say, in passing and from an angle, the conversations about toilets, about prisons, even about passports and things. And I think I knew that something made me feel uncomfortable about what was being said, but there's that thing that tells you if you go there with concerns, that people are going to bite, people are going to come at you without even knowing exactly what that was going to be like. So you just there was a sense, I think, of that something, don't go there. And I think part of it is like, if you go there, you're not going to like what you see. And of course, I did look eventually, and I didn't like what I saw. So I think probably the majority of people are somewhere in that zone where they really haven't thought it through. And if they did, the majority of them, I think, inevitably are, because fundamentally people know that a man can't be a woman. And if that's the case, then everything else falls apart. Because if a man can't be a woman, then all of the things that depend on a man being a woman fall away. It was that kind of growing unease about, because things were becoming, I was seeing more things. I was seeing a certain Scottish comedian tweeting, I support trans people. And there was just something about those posts that made me think, that there's something else going on here. It's when you suddenly realise that the be kind thing actually isn't kind to everyone, and that if you start to say, well, but what about this other group? When you start to think, take prisons for example, I'm quite sure that probably like I did, people when they think about trans-identified men going into prison, the picture of who they're thinking about is someone, and I don't want to name names, but you imagine they probably imagine someone who's frail and vulnerable and kind of woman-like. And they probably are thinking about that sort of thing and thinking of someone like that in a men's prison. They think, oh my goodness, because they don't see the reality or what's also part of that reality. Because that person, that frail, vulnerable person, I'm certain exists. Whether they're in prison or not is maybe another question. But that frail, vulnerable person does exist. But that's not what that group is limited to. And it's when you realise what the full spread of the group that are being advocated for, and how little concern there is about placing any limits on that, and about there being any limits on that. And you're thinking, well, when you think it through and you think through the logic, and you think, well, that means that someone like this, I mean, Karen White is the obvious example from England. And when you look at the photographs of that person, and you think, well, that's not my frail, vulnerable person who's bound to be at risk in a men's prison. That's somebody completely different. And and then of course you think about anybody who's perceived as male in a women's prison, however frail or vulnerable they might be, is still a male in a women's prison and shouldn't be there. And that the fact that they are has an effect, not just because of the risk of assault, although that does exist, but just because of the psychological effect. I think also just fundamentally, right down at the bottom of it, the fact that in drawing up that policy, nobody cared, but nobody cared to even ask what effect that would have on women in prison. Nobody has ever, who's been making these policies, has ever betrayed the slightest concern about the effect of women of introducing males into what are supposed to be and are still labelled as women's spaces. You see it in all these conversations, it's just immediately goes there. It's just, well, you obviously, I had one this morning about prisons, oddly enough, and it was just admit you hate trans people. And it's like, well, that's just we're not going there. Just go away. Because I'm over now. I resent sometimes the amount of time that you're expected to spend reassuring people that you don't hate trans people, and that you do want trans people to have all of the rights that they're entitled to. We're not talking about rights. We're talking about demands for other people's rights, and that's a different conversation. So I spend less time now reassuring anybody that I don't hate folk, because I put the boot in the other foot. It's like, well, you've shown me the evidence that anything I've said is hateful, because it's not. It's that thing about, and again, if the legislation goes through without those safeguards the MBM identified about making it explicit that the Equality Act is not affected, more explicit than the amendment that they did accept, that doesn't change sex, then it means that the situation that does apply in some situations, like in changing rooms, in hospital wards, in toilets, in sports, in all of these sort of arenas, will become very, very difficult to come back from. We are in a bad situation as far, we know about the Primark thing, and we know about all of these places. The local health board here has just been revealed to have this policy that says that a woman patient in a ward who complains about a man that she can see as a man in the ward will be told, assuming it's a female ward, will be told, no, there isn't a man. And by staff working from a policy that implicitly labels the woman complaining as a bigot. So she will be lied to, and she will be slandered, even if not explicitly. She will be slandered, at least in the potentially in the minds of the people dealing with her. And potentially she will be moved rather than the man moved, which just leaves everybody else. So when I worry about all these situations, and I worry about my daughter and all of her peers, being in that situation and not having any prospect of improvement, not having any prospect of getting out, of constantly getting this message that all a woman is, as they start out on a path that I hope will see her kind of come to know things that it's taken me until in my 50s to understand about women's place in the world and how it came to be. I want her to know a lot more about that than I did when I was her age. I want her to be able to be a lot more assertive and a lot more able to demand what she has the right to have in terms of recognition as a human being with full agency. I definitely want her to get there a lot earlier than I did. And the system is going to be beating her back and saying all you are is long hair and a head tilt and the clothes you wear and the makeup you wear, and if you depart from that standard, then we will question whether you really are a woman, whether you really are a girl. Even as it stands now, I see her when she's doing her various activities with all of her peers, whether it's school things or out of school activities. And I sometimes struggle to pick her out of the crowd because they all look so alike. They all have long straight hair parted in the middle. I mean, okay, there's always been fads and there's always been trends about clothing, and there's probably not a great deal has changed about that, except that I think that it's got worse. The sort of trends that they're following are more obviously sexualized. I'm relieved to say she's not one of the ones who's farthest down that road, and nor do I think she's likely to be. But I do see it from some of her peers. I see photographs of some of her peers, kids I've known since they were 5 years old, and I don't recognise them for different reasons. It's because they've all got really, really thick makeup that makes them look like clones of one another. And I find that really disappointing when I see the pouting selfies and I think it's women. We're worth more. They're worth more than that. That drives me nuts because it's we've got all this message, and I know you've heard this before. We all have. There's been so long trying to push this message that you can wear what you want, you can look how you want, you can have your hair long, you can have it short, you can wear makeup, you can not wear makeup, and it doesn't matter what sex you are. You can wear, and we're moving so far away from that. And it's so depressing. And I mean, again, reading feminism has given me an insight into where that pushback comes from and what motivates it. And it's super depressing to come to understand the role that ultimately men's sexual appetites have in all of this, in driving the trends that spread and have this effect on so many different people. Nowadays, if you call yourself a feminist, you have to be explicit, at least if you're on the side of it that I am, and we are, that you have to be explicit, you have to qualify it by being clear about what kind of feminist you are, even though, I think it was Julie Bindel I saw saying something about just a real feminist. And I tend to agree with that. I'm just a real feminist, because if what you're doing is not serving the interests of women exclusively, or specifically, then that's not feminism that you're doing. And I've come around to that way of thinking about it, is that feminism isn't what you are, it's what you do. So if you are doing something that is feminist, then even if you maybe don't call yourself one, you're still doing feminism. And if what you are doing, no matter whether you call yourself a feminist or not, if what you are doing works against the interests of women, then again, no matter what you label yourself, you're not doing feminism, you're not a feminist. So that's been a kind of a useful thing for me recently, is to think of it in terms of it's not what you are, it's what you do. think what I would want people to do is if you already know all about it, talk to people who don't. And if you don't already know all about it, but you're beginning to see that there's an issue, speak to someone who knows about it and find out what's going on. Write to MSPs, write to MPs, write to newspapers, I'm going to write to my local health board and chase up that business with their policy. But as far as the legislation is concerned, is speak about it. Don't look away. This is very serious, because if this passes, it will be very difficult. I think one day we will get back from it, but it will be very difficult to get back from it. And there will be a great deal of harm done along the way. So it is urgent, and we need to make sure that everybody who can possibly know about it knows about it.